So, Sam, basically, you agree with me that an application, a joint honours application for modern history with English could be optimal. Now, I probably would encourage you to take quite a political lens on modern history. I might even ask you to read, well, I've got 4 different histories of Western thought in my mind. The standard one is Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. There's a much edgier one called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. And because I know about your reading last year, I imagine you'd prefer the Richard Tarnas book to the Bertrand Russell book. Then there's A.C. Grayling's book. Slightly different title because he also looks at India, Africa, and the rest of the East. So his is the history not of Western philosophy, but the history of philosophy. Much more recent book, only less than a decade old, whereas Russell, we're looking at 1945. And the 4th one in the series, if you want to read all 4, would be Anthony Kenny's book. I think I've got that here actually. And what's great about this one, it's an illustrated history, so it's not page after page after page. By the way, the Russell one comes in 2 different editions. There's the usual traditional one, and then there's the illustrated Russell. I think you'd have a lot of fun, but it's probably about 3 weeks' work for you to read all 4. How would you go about selecting, if I could provide you with all 4 in a pile, how would you go about choosing 2?
I feel like I'd read a sample of all 4, maybe about 10 to 20 pages of each, then really just thinking what sort of style I like the most and just choosing the 2 that I like.
Now, the reason Tarnas is edgy, he goes back looking for historical events and how there might be explanations outside the normal linear Western narrative. And he believes that cosmological events, Halley's Comet or solar flares, very topical at the moment, he believes that those events have a massive impact on the unfolding of political events. Would you find that an acceptable vein to explore, or do you think that's beyond the fringe?
I'd quite like to look at that, because I feel like cosmological events, even just in culture, they do affect it. People believe that some of them they might bring about the end of the world. So I feel like it's hard to think that it won't have any effect on politics at all.
Yeah. I mean, you and I know it's more likely that CERN will bring about the end of the world. But that's just a conspiracy theory. So let's leave that thought there. Now, you've already got one lens on politics that came to you in a very powerful way. Can you tell us about your relationship with John Donne?
Well, John Donne, I first encountered him as part of my A-level English literature studies, because we look at a big collection of his poems, his songs and sonnets, and then his divine poetry. And I feel like he's really not just one man, he's really a multitude of people, all like an amalgamation, if you say it that way.
Are you accusing him of schizophrenia, or are you saying there's a plenitude of personality archetypes inside?
I wouldn't say schizophrenia, but I feel like he talks about so many different things in so many different viewpoints. I mean, for example, love. One poem he might be doing the typical Petrarchan conventions of love, or the mistress who's so cruel leaves this person pouring with emotion. Then in another poem, like Love's Alchemy, he can totally just say, "Oh, love is completely fake." It's like with an allusion to Plato's allegory of the cave. It's like a vain bubble shadow play, and it's almost like it's not real love. It's just something that. It's an illusion. It's not something that you can actually experience.
And he was also involved in politics himself. I mean, he rocks up eventually at St. Paul's, doesn't he? And that has to be signed off by the king. He also moves religious position quite radically early on. Can you say something about the movement of his religious position?
Well, early on he was a Catholic, but then because he was living in late Elizabethan and early Jacobean times, Catholicism was quite looked down upon, and it would really restrict your social mobility. You wouldn't be able to get jobs, you'd be sort of socially ostracised.
Well, that happens not just then, but I mean, here is Anthony Kenny's Guide to Western Philosophy. Anthony Kenny was a Catholic priest, and then he converted to the Church of England. And there's some kind of echo there with Donne, because Kenny was able to make more progress academically and become a professor with more ease because he was in the right philosophical and theological mould. So there's nothing new under the sun. It's new wine in an old bottle. And I know you're interested in those resonances through time. I mean, the echo of the shots fired in Dallas goes down the decades and down the centuries. And I often think of it as coming forwards through the 6 decades since. But you think of it as going back through the centuries before. Can you say something about that?
Well, I feel like sort of everything. I feel like echoes going back in time. It's sort of as part of like looking, especially as part of a history A level. I feel like looking back at something that I like to do rather than sort of looking at how things progress, looking at how things have been, and how like going backwards they are different to what we experience now. I feel like it's really interesting to see where we've come from as a species as a whole, and sort of how concepts have almost evolved through time, but looking backwards they sort of devolve into this sort of chaos.
So one of the thinkers that gives us a toolkit for trying to do that is Michel Foucault. Now, we often see him depicted as a mere sociologist, a French troublemaker. But in fact, he's interested in how language and its usage changes over time. And he's got these concepts of archaeology and genealogy. How do the words in the language today connect with each other? But how do the meanings of the words today reflect and build upon the meaning of the words from the past? Now, although you did a lot of work last year with etymological decoding, can you say how etymological decoding was of use to you, either in your reading or in your interviews?
Well, especially in my reading, it's a lot of times I'll come across a word that I have no clue what it means. And I could just spend about 30 seconds going on my computer and Googling it. But then where's the fun in that? You could just actually look at the word, break it down into prefixes, suffixes, and just really have a think about what do you think it means. And even if you look at it in context, you can really just get a really good, valuable insight into what it could mean, just based on what letters are in it.
Did you have that experience with Super Infinite? Because I know that your world opened up when you read Super Infinite. Can you tell us a little bit about finding Super Infinite? And then what was the lexical engagement? Did it stretch you?
Yeah, well, you recommended it to me, of course. But then when I was reading it, I feel like as part of Rondell, it's sort of this almost revolutionary style of writing. It's sort of replicates modern speech, I suppose, a bit like John Donne's own writing. But there are a few words that are scattered about that I had to like decode individually. And while I wasn't always getting them right by etymological decoding, I was almost half right all the time, and then for a good few cases I was 100% right.
Now, she's a fellow at All Souls. She's reached the peak of her academic career. I mean, she may do other great things. If I can fast forward you 10 or 15 years, you've become a writer with an academic background. What are you going to give to the world? You'll be a knowledge creator, but what do you want to give us?
I just really want to give people just an avenue to really explore how they feel, especially in like modern society, how it's almost this sort of constricting thing. You have to conform to all these social norms. I feel like having something that people can relate to, even if it's not really considered normal or what you should be conforming to. I feel like just giving them that avenue to explore.
So can I glance a blow at you? You're voting tomorrow in the English-British general election. You've talked about not conforming to dominant norms. Can I take it from that you won't be voting for the main brands tomorrow?
No, I won't be voting for Labour or Tories, no.
Oh, well, I admire your consistency. I wanted to give you a gift, literary terms and literary theory. And I'm not expecting you to read this from cover to cover. Well, I am really, but I'm going to pretend that I'm not expecting you to read all of it. But I would like you to dig into it and find me 5 interesting concepts. Write me a 600-word essay and get it over to me by tonight.
Sounds good.
Sam, thank you very much.
Thanks.